In this section, we're going to look a little more in detail at the ovarian cycle, the hormones that control it, and the effect that has on the endometrial layer. So let's look first at the development of the follicle compared with two hormones we haven't talked about yet. So these graphs show the days in the menstrual cycle starting at day 1, which is the first day of menstrual bleeding. And that's just the way we define the menstrual cycle because that one is observable. It might make more sense to start it at ovulation, but we don't know when that happens necessarily. But we can always tell where the first day of menstrual bleeding is. So by definition, that's the definition of the first day of the cycle. And this has the menstrual cycle as 28 days, which is the average menstrual cycle. But if you talk to, any women, really ever, but there are so few women whose menstrual cycles are regular and 28 days. There's a lot of, again, individual variation, and some women's cycles are much shorter, and some women's are much, much longer and painful. Okay, so we already talked about the development of the follicle from the primary to the secondary follicle, where you can see the antrum, to the mature follicle. Ovulation happens, again, this is an average, on day 14. And then the follicle that remains in the ovary becomes the corpus luteum. And then if fertilization does not happen, becomes the corpus albicans and gets reabsorbed by the uterus, or by the ovary, excuse me. So this graph, now this is the same timeline here, starting at day 1. And this shows two hormones we haven't talked about yet. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. Guess what? It's going to stimulate the follicles. And then luteinizing hormone is another hormone, and both of these are released by the brain. So these are going to be released in response to other signals. And you can see that follicle stimulating hormone is high during the period when the follicles are developing. So it helps with follicular development. And then luteinizing hormone gradually increases and then spikes right before ovulation. Follicle stimulating hormone decreases and then spikes before ovulation. And then both of those stay low until the end of the cycle. And then when the cycle starts again, they both increase again. So these are signals produced by the brain. The follicle cells, remember those granulosum cells, those cells are producing first estrogen and then progesterone. And as you can see, we go back over here, as follicle stimulating hormone is high, that stimulates the follicle, which causes the follicles to produce estrogen. And so during the beginning of the menstrual cycle, during menstrual bleeding, which here they show lasting for a hilarious 3 to 4 days. I mean, I'm sure some women have that happen, but wow, so many women, it lasts a lot longer than that. Anyway, while the endometrial layer is being shed, the next cycle is starting, and follicles are producing estrogen. So that estrogen increases, and then as the mature follicle develops and gets ready for ovulation, the estrogen levels spike. This increase in estrogen level tells the brain to produce this spike in luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which produces ovulation. Now the follicle is going to turn into the corpus luteum. And remember, form follows function, or function follows form. So as this changes, it goes from producing estrogen to producing progesterone. Progesterone finishes the development of this functional layer of the endometrium. So the estrogen has been building up the endometrial layer, and then the progesterone completes that development of the endometrial layer. And then both of those, estrogen and progesterone, decrease if fertilization doesn't happen and menstrual bleeding starts again as this functional layer is shed. And then remember, the basal layer stays around. So the important thing to know here is that it's the estrogen that is caused by the increase in estrogen is caused by the development of the follicles, but also the giving a woman estrogen causes follicular development. Those two things go together. The other thing is that progesterone, high levels of progesterone, signal that an oocyte has already been released, which is why progesterone is the hormone that is most commonly found in birth control pills, because it tells the brain and the ovaries that ovulation has already happened. There's no need to start another follicular development. And so by keeping progesterone levels high, a couple things happen. One is you prevent the development of a follicle and you prevent ovulation completely. The other thing that happens is that you don't have this initial buildup of the functional layer of the endometrium. You just have this buildup. And since you just have this decreased buildup of the endometrial layer, most women on the pill have much lighter periods. And so that is one benefit of taking the pill. It's also why the birth control pill is really the only non-surgical treatment for a disease called endometriosis, in which endometrial tissue, for reasons that we do not understand well, develops outside of the uterus. And it can develop kind of anywhere in the pelvic cavity, sometimes in the abdominal cavity. It's still going to respond to estrogen and follicle stimulating hormone and do mitosis and increase in size. And then during menstruation, it's going to try to shed, and as you might imagine, that's going to cause a lot of pain when all of these cells suddenly try to when they die and try to be shed, and there's nowhere to put them. So endometriosis is a condition in which women have long, very, very painful periods, especially with very, very heavy bleeding. And the primary non-surgical treatment for it is the birth control pill. There is a surgical treatment in which a doctor goes in and scrapes away some of the endometrium to try to prevent that occurring, and then they try to find endometrial tissue, I think, in the rest of the cavity. But that's kind of a very invasive procedure. So the first thing they try to do is just put a woman on the birth control pill and see if that will control the endometriosis. So keep in mind that anytime people try to block people from getting the birth control pill, what they're blocking is the primary medical treatment for a very, very painful and debilitating condition. So anyway, here's what all of that looks like together so that you can see the change in the endometrial layer, the change in the hormones, estrogen increasing before ovulation, progesterone increasing after ovulation, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone produced by the brain responding to the increase in estrogen, and then the development of the follicle. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say about the birth control pill. Some people criticize the birth control pill because they say it unnaturally messes with a woman's hormones. And that's not actually true. If you think of life before the birth control pill, women would have spent far more of their time, of their life, pregnant, because they're without birth control, with only condoms, there was very little ability to control when you got pregnant. And some states even limited people's ability to buy condoms. And so a woman would have spent a lot more of her life with being pregnant in normal times, normal lifestyle. Because of that, she would have spent a lot more of her life with her progesterone levels being high, because progesterone levels stay high during pregnancy in order to prevent the development of more follicles and release of another egg. So while it kind of makes sense that this is sort of messing with your hormones, it's actually making your hormones at a normal level for more common pregnancies. So it's actually doing a really natural thing for your body. So there are side effects to the birth control pill that many women don't like. There's a lot of women gain weight on the pill. A lot of women, oddly enough, lose sexual desire on the pill, which, granted, will help decrease your chance of getting pregnant. But if you're trying to be in a loving relationship, that may not be what you want. Some women also do have emotional reactions to it, that changes in the emotions that are very unpleasant. And for a lot of women, that can be a reason to stop taking it. So anyway, it's more complicated, just like everything we talk about. But anyway, that's what's happening between the relationships between the hormones and the endometrial layer.